Hello Nital, in this video I'm presenting my final project for the information encoding standards class. So let's get started. So the goal of my this project is to create a secure API that performs get all and get one functionality on a simple data set. So I will be using JWT with OAuth for authorization. So I'm going to be demonstrating my API later in the part 2 of my project. So I am Naveen Selvaraju. I am a student and student in Big Data Analytics program at Georgian College. My student ID is 200447929. So let's start with the part one of our project. So the part one of our project is to answer this following 8 questions. How can we transfer personal data securely within a network? There are different ways to transfer personal data securely in a network. The first one is to use a file transfer protocol application that uses file transfer protocol. This method is great for transferring large quantities of files. Next is to send the files through a peer-to-peer platform. It is useful for sending a file in a small group of people like a WhatsApp group. Next is to use a cloud service. Now, the cloud service is using a cloud service is a fast way of sharing files, and it has a greater availability across the network. Then the last final way I am suggesting is to use a email. We can use emails to transfer small files, small quantities of files. So the next question is to what security protocol is the best for transferring personal files? I am suggesting the best protocol for securely transferring personal file is SFTP. SFTP uses secure shell data string, so it is better at security than normal FTP. It prevents unauthorized access to sensitive information like passwords and personal data. So can we encode and encrypt images? Yes, we can allow, of course, encode and encrypt image data. And image data is nothing but a binary data. Therefore, it can be encoded and encrypted using algorithms such as AES and SHA. The fourth question is to create a API for our database. This is the architecture of building a secure API, and it has the following elements. And the developer is the one who creates an API and publishes to the API portal. The end user is the one who consumes the data from the API. The API gateway is the application that handles the end user request and authorizes the user identity and provides access to the API data. So here the API is the REST API is used to connect to our data in the database. So a secure framework for coding an API, I suggest using OAuth framework with the OpenID. So OAuth framework is only allows authenticated users to access the data in the remote servers. So also your OAuth user uses JWT token authentication. It is a secure way of authorizing a user identity. Data interchange format should be used to what is the data interchange format should be used during transfer of data between locations. The format used is the JSON format. It stands for JavaScript object notation. It is a text-based format for transferring file. The other format I can think of is the data transfer using an XML file. The seventh question is to how should we store our data in multiple locations. So data stored in multiple locations should be accessed by a user using a single sign-on. I think we need to authenticate and authorize our data in multiple locations using a single sign-on so that users don't have to sign in to access data in every location. So we can do that using OAuth and OpenID for authorization and authentication respectively. So what are the ethical concerns related to transmission of data, transmission of personal data? So the ethical concerns are unauthorized access of data, computer hackers, data loss due to malfunctions, then identity fraud. Identity fraud is when personal data is used by someone else for their own benefits. Now that I answered the security questions, let's move on to the part two of our project. That is to create a secure API using JWT token authentication. So the objective of this second part two is to create a secure API using JWT and demonstrate the API in Postman and recommend a framework for authentication. Then to demonstrate the get all and get one functionality of the API. So the JWT tokens can be used to authorize access to resources for the authenticated users of the API. So JWT token has the following structure. It has the first part is the header, then the payload, then the signature. These values are separated connected using a simple dot. So now we are going to be using the JWT token with the OAuth authorization framework to successfully create a secure web API. So this is the structure, this is the process flow of the OAuth authorization framework. So initially, the client sends a authorization request to the resource owner. Then it will get the authorization grant in the form of a code. Then we will be using that authorization grant or code to send that grant or code to the authorization server. Then the authorization server will send an access token back to the client. This access token is also called a bearer token, is usually in the form of a JWT token. So now the user or client has that access token. They can use that access token to request data from the resource server. Now I will demonstrate my API. So my API has three endpoints: a client, a server, and an API endpoint. In the client endpoint, I will configure the OAuth server. We'll set the authorization endpoint to point to the endpoint in the server that authorizes the users, and then we'll set the token endpoint to the endpoint in the server that grants the token to the client application. So initially, and in the client, we'll send a secure request to the server, and then the server will return a access token, JWT access token. So we will use this JWT access token to request our API, to request data from our API. In the server, the OAuth controller performs the JWT token authentication. It will receive the user information and creates a JWT token, creates the access token, and returns the access token back to the client. Next, in the API, the API endpoint has this endpoint for getting all the data, and this endpoint for getting single data. So when we send a request to the when we send a request to the API, it will use this JWT requirement to validate the access token. It will see if the access token is valid or not. Then it will proceed. Then if the user token access token is valid, it will send the data requested by the user. This is the front end of my client application. Now I will send the GET request. Since there is no cookie and no authentication or access tokens stored in a cookie, I'm going to be I'm going to do perform authentication. Here in the OAuth controller in the server endpoint, we can see an API an access token JWT access token generated. So here is our JWT access token. Now it will the access token will be sent to the client, which will be stored in the form of a cookie. This is the output of my output written by my API. So you can see the cookie has been generated in the client side, and it has the JWT token and user credentials stored in the cookie. Next, I'm going to demonstrate my API in the Postman get request in a Postman get request. So I chosen my authorization to OAuth 2. Now I have set the settings as per the settings in the client application. I set the callback function pointing to the auth folder in my server endpoint. Then I send the auth URL to the authorization endpoint in the server, token URL to the token endpoint in the server. Then I have sent the client ID and client secret and the state of the application. Now when I type in get a new access token, I will be redirected to the login path. So here is the new access token generated in the Postman get request generated for the Postman get request. So I'm going to use this token and send a get request. So you can see the data has been successfully sent back in the Postman get request. Now this is the get all functionality. Now I'm going to demonstrate the get one functionality. So I'm going to specify my state name as CT, state ID as CT, then send a get request. Now we can see only one data has been written by the API. Prove that our auth authorization correctly works. I'm going to send a get request without any authorization parameters set. You can see it's written for one unauthorized. In the final part of the project, I'm going to recommend a framework for authentication. The OAuth framework covers the authorization part of building a secure API. Now I'm going to suggest a good authentication framework to authenticate users to the API. So there are two well-known authentication frameworks. One is OpenID, one is Security Assertion Markup Language. The OpenID is built around the OAuth authorization framework. Therefore, it goes hand in hand with the OAuth authorization framework. It also uses JWT token for authentication. This framework is used in Google sign-in apps, where we can use our Google account to sign into multiple apps. So the security assertion markup language is a second type of authentication framework. It is widely used in a work environment, and an employee can it allows an employee who logged into the corporate internet to access services available in the workplace environment. It is also very secure for considering its main use purpose is in a corporate environment. My recommendation for authentication is, since we are using the authorization for authorization, I suggest we use OpenID, which is also a very secure framework.